I forgot to unmute myself. How I was talking. Good job on your quiz. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. Can I still take my quiz or no?
Mm-mm.
Because I was sitting in the waiting room at 2:30.
The quiz started at 2:30. We'll talk about it after. Okay. All right. So this week we have chapter 17. Did anybody get a chance to review chapter 17? Look at the PowerPoints? All right, so chapter 17 is about leading and managing. Um, and so we look at, what your role is it? Um, LPNs are going to be in leadership positions. So developing your leadership and your management skills. That way you can direct and supervise others, right, to, meet the goals of your employer. So wherever you are, whether it's in a clinic, in a hospital, in long-term care, anywhere, then, you guys are going to be working. Um, LPN service charge nurses. I've seen LPNs as unit managers. I've seen LPNs as even assistant director of nurses. So it really depends on the organization and where you are working, excuse me, that is going to determine your role. So you will be supervising nursing assistants in their goals or in their roles, right? So that's why developing those leadership and management skills are going to be important. Has anybody heard of a mission statement or a vision statement before? So
Yeah,
what's a mission statement?
kind of like the values and principles of like a facility. Is that
Right. Go ahead.
what they're trying to accomplish by you know, what they're trying to put into motion and trying to accomplish, I guess. I don't know.
Right. No, you got it. You got it. So if I were to ask you, those of you that are currently working, does anybody know what their mission statement is at their organization?
I do know like part of mine's really long at my facility, so but I know part of it.
Does anybody know what the mission statement is for what are the core values for Fortis? Does anybody know?
Education.
Education, okay.
Is one of them
Integrity,
empower?
honesty.
Okay, so we have integrity, student-focused outcomes, commitment, service excellence, and respect, right? So those are those core values that we have here at Fortis. Um, so anywhere you go, no matter where you work, there's going to be a mission statement. And like Jamie was saying, it's the purpose, it's the goals of the organizations. And so LPNs, RNs, the goal is to work towards that vision, lead the team members so that we can, help to fulfill and commit to that mission. And again, it's going to be different, where you work. And so, the goal of all healthcare, right, is to provide quality care to our patients, our clients. How we get there, you know, is going to be determined by whatever that mission statement is. So who currently works in healthcare now? Mira, where do you work, or what do you do? Are you a CNA, med tech,
I
RMA?
do home health aid. I did it for 8 years.
Okay. And so who do you report to?
Nobody.
Uh, so are you like a contractor? Like, do you contract yourself?
Yes.
Okay, so you contract yourself. Um, so it really just kind of depends on how you're employed, right? How you're working. So when I was working as a home health aide 100 years ago in Florida, I worked for an agency, so I had an RN that was my overall supervisor, right? So even though, you know, our jobs as home health aides were a little bit different than a CNA and obviously a nurse, right? I still had someone I had to report to. So and this goes back to week 1. So what determines what our role and boundaries are as a nurse, as an LPN? What determines our roles and our boundaries?
The Nurse Practice
The
Practice
nurse,
Act.
yes, the Nurse Practice Act. That is where we are going to get our roles, our boundaries. And so it's super really important to understand that. Has everybody heard of an org chart? I'm going to share my screen. I forgot. I apologize. Can you all see the PowerPoints? All right. Have you guys ever seen an org chart before? No. So an organization chart like this one, it is kind of like the chain of command, so to speak. All right. So in this case, we have, you know, the owner of the nursing home, whether it's a large company, whether it's an individual, whatever it is, right? Then we would have a board of directors. And then under the board of directors, and obviously the owner is going to have overall control, is going to be all the different departments. So therapy, dietary, our occupational, physical, nursing, maintenance, social services, secretarial services, activities. Under nursing, you have like a DON, you have a nurse manager, your charge nurse, and your nursing assistant. What your org chart looks like is going to depend on where you're working and who you're working with, right? So some of the org charts that I've seen, like we'll have the overall company, then we may have, I'm going to start with this next, we may have corporate oversight, like corporate educators, corporate vice presidents, right? Dietary in a lot of cases will be grouped together as one, or not dietary, therapy is going to be grouped together as one. And then under each one of these is going to be the participants in that department, right? So how many people work, you know, if there's 2 people that work in activities, or maybe, you know, more lines under each one of these. And this would be, you know, more of what we kind of see in the nursing, right? So director of nursing, a supervisor, a nurse manager, and then you have your charge nurses, your UAPs, and your nursing assistants under there. So director of nursing is, generally speaking, is going to be an RN, supervisor as well, the nurse manager. And again, this is going to be determined by where you were working. The last place that I worked under the director of nursing. I served as an assistant director and a nurse manager. Then I had a supervisor that worked in the evenings. She was an LPN, so she was in charge of the whole building. And then we had charge nurse, and then we had we had a charge nurse, and we had med nurses, as well as CNAs. So your org chart This is something that you should be aware of. You should know who your direct supervisor is, as well as who your direct reports are. Anytime that you were, anywhere that you were working, that kind of helps you to determine, who who you are responsible for. Especially when you're looking at delegating, that kind of thing. Remember too, as a charge nurse, you are going to be responsible for supervising the care that is given by the unlicensed assisted personnel, whether, it's a nurse aide or a CNA. So let's talk about this. So these are some of the differences between a leader and a manager. And so when you look at the differences, think of somewhere that you have worked, and look at some of the managers or the supervisors that you have had in those places that you've worked. I'm going to stop sharing. Let's talk. So who has had really good experiences with their supervisors or managers? Okay, Joelle, so what are some of the qualities that made them great?
Um, well, just during school, like being able to be flexible with my schedule.
Okay, flexibility with your schedule. What else? Anybody else?
I've had good experience with supervision or managerial people above me, but just when they get involved, they help when you need it. They ask for your input on things. I feel like that's really important, to know your team that's working for you and value their opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
What are who's worked with a manager or supervisor that wasn't very good? Nobody? Nobody wants to share bad experiences? What about the manager, the supervisor that doesn't listen to your concerns or barks orders and doesn't really know what's going on? And that could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be just in healthcare, right? Managers and supervisors are in every industry. But when we look at the difference between, I'll share my screen again. We look at the differences between a leader and a manager. Leader are more people oriented, right? They help to provide motivation to their staff members. They have a vision, they, strategize, they listen, they empower, they delegate, and the managers are very task oriented. And so, this just kind of like, this is what you need to do. And, not really look at the whole big picture. They instruct others, they have subordinates, they, are supervisors. They also more of goal setting and goal measuring. Which would you prefer to have, a leader or a manager?
I'd rather have a leader.
Rather have a leader. Absolutely. So when we look at leadership, right, this is how a person empowers and develops that team to meet and exceed their client outcomes. And so, it influence the beliefs, the opinions, the behaviors of a person, guiding, motivating, inspire them. There's also informal leaders, and a lot of people, I'm sure, have worked with informal leaders. Again, doesn't matter if you're in healthcare or if you're working somewhere else, right? There's always one member of the team, right, that seems to really have a good feel for what's going on, is a good resource for others is motivating, right? There's always that one that's always happy-go-lucky, right? Trying to motivate everybody to do a good job. And so those informal leaders. Do you think all informal leaders are good leaders? No, Heather's shaking her head no. Why do
Not
you
all.
think that?
It depends on the type of attitude that they have towards the job and the workers.
Absolutely, right? Because some of our informal leaders don't have the best attitude, right? They're a little more aggressive, maybe a little more assertive, but people are afraid to go against them, right? Because, they seem to have a lot of power within the workplace. And they can still influence people. So, has anybody ever looked at the different types of, management style or leadership styles to see what kind of a leader you are? No? So as you prepare, so nursing school, right? You're going to have your basic skills, how to use the nursing process, right? Time management skills for home and clinical time, right? So especially in this last term, those time management skills are coming into play, right? As you're trying to coordinate all your classes, your preceptors, study for your HESIs, learning how to use or how to learn new information, including evidence for learning and decision making. That's something that you have, strive to achieve in your nursing program. The power of positive self-talk and thinking. How many people hype themselves up in the morning? Right? Look in the mirror in the morning and you're like, you got this, you can do it, right? You're awesome, right? We need to have that positive self-talk, especially when things are getting really rough. And so it's important for us to build ourselves up, especially when the world seems to be crashing down, right? When you're super stressed out, when you've got a lot going on. How many people are working and trying to go to school right now? All right, there's a few of you, right? So that's not exactly an easy situation to be in, right? Working, going to school. Know the rules for assertiveness, which we've talked about the difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. Communication skills are key, those active listening skills. The ethical and legal aspects, problem solving and critical thinking. Talked about critical thinking probably from day one of nursing school, right? Stress management. Who has really good stress management skills? Wait a minute, come on now. Who has some stress management skills? Okay, some. Um, so uh, we need to go back to this stress management here. So what do you do when you get stressed out?
Form a solution quickly.
Form like that, form it quickly, right?
And
Sit
then you
down.
don't stress no more because you got a solution.
There you go. There you go. Get a solution. What if it's something that is completely out of your control and you can't come up with a solution right away? What can we do?
Pray about it.
Okay, pray about it, right? What about, let's think about, let's say you're working the unit and you have two CNAs that are arguing. What are you going to do? Right? are you gonna do? You
They're
have
just
your,
gonna be arguing. They're just gonna be arguing. I ain't worrying about it. I wouldn't care. I mean, it might sound crazy, but that's why I'm going to a prison to work, because I don't even want to deal with CNAs at all. I don't even want to deal with them. Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
they don't, I guess, no, I guess there wouldn't be a need for CNAs in a prison system.
Mm-mm.
Um, but these are things, right? What happens, when you go into work and there's CNAs that call out that, there's a nurse that calls out, there's a variety of things obviously that can happen, right? When you clock in for your shift, right? So being able to manage that stress, um, and how to problem solve, use your critical thinking all at the same time. And then participation in clinical evaluation. So in a lot of in a lot of places, um, depending on your role, you will be providing clinical evaluations. For those that you are working with. So that is something that, to take into consideration as well as you're supervising the CNAs, the unlicensed personnel. And it's not just, a lot of it, yes, has to do with the care that they are providing to to the patients or to the clients. But there's a lot more that goes into those evaluations, right? So leadership styles. So these are the three primary leadership styles that, you will generally see, autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. So autocratic, they don't share responsibility. The emphasis is, they're just concerned with the tasks. They just tell people, go do this. They don't, want any input. Um, so you're just basically like, okay, Jamie, go do this, right? Just get it done kind of thing. Your democratic is, more shared responsibility. Um, they are, still concerned with enforcing policies, but they are also concerned for the employees. They seek input from employees. They encourage problem solving. Um, they know that having like the positive attitude and the positive staff interaction is going to, help them achieve their goals, right? It's more of an empowerment with your coworkers and your employees. Laissez-faire, right? They just have that almost like an I don't care attitude as long as the job gets done. Puts the employees before policies. They try to please everyone. And so, it really does, in a lot of cases, kind of puts you're the one that's going to be, very autonomous in your role. But overall, it's still, goal oriented. Um, and so, in certain situations, each one of these leadership styles is really good, right? Especially with your autocratic, like looking at crisis situations. They're gonna not really, I hate to say bark orders, but they are really good in those situations where the team needs very, concise direction. And so they work really well with those. With your why I want to keep saying democratic, daily nursing care situations, meetings, committees, all of those things, right? they have that nice shared responsibility. So they're able to work within a team in order to get it done. So who has ever worked with somebody who's been very autocratic? Like just gonna tell you what to do and not really, doesn't really matter. Anybody? What about democratic? Laissez-faire, any of them?
I think I've worked with all types, all three of those types in my life, different jobs, you know. When you're in a crisis in a situation, you're thankful to have that autocratic person that's helping you through if you're not good at dealing with something like that, in my opinion. But I would prefer a more democratic approach myself.
And most people do. Most people do prefer to have a democratic leadership style, almost like a shared governance, right? With those that they're working with. Laissez-faire doesn't really, just that style of leadership doesn't really work well in in nursing, where we need to have some goal direction with our staff. The other one that is pretty common, and it's just really or it's more common, I should say. And it's a combination really of kind of all of them, is your situational leadership. And so basically you're varying your leadership style to the situation, right? So, when you think of all three types of leaders, at times in your nursing career, there's going to be times where you need to be autocratic, right? And just assigning a task. There's going to be times when you need to be demographic, or I don't know why I keep saying demographic. I apologize. Democratic, where we need to take the whole team together, right? And try to figure out a solution for some things. Laissez-faire does have, its place in some situations as well, right? Because you're giving the authority to employees. It does give them a little bit of empowerment. They also try to, put the employees before policies, which that could be bad in situations as well. And so again, this situational leadership kind of, whatever the situation, the leadership style is going to change, right? We've had, some, I'm sure, have had supervisors or, directors that you can, look back on, and you can see how in certain situations their leadership style has changed depending on the situation. It's a very versatile. And so, it really just kind of depends. But this is more and more of what we're seeing now is, this situational leadership that changes as needed. So core knowledge and skills that we need for leaderships, there's 5 core areas that are necessary for you as future LPNs in order to be an effective leader. Motivation, you need to be able to motivate your team to accomplish the goals. And so as an LPN, in most cases, that is going to be working with your CNAs, your unlicensed assistive personnel. It's also going to be working with your RN as well, right? Lots of collaboration, communication, communicate clearly. This is something that everybody always needs improvement on. problem solving, team building, stress management. Stress management, I'm going to stress that again. Everybody needs to have effective stress management. This kind of does help you, throughout the day, in almost every aspect of healthcare. How many of us have just felt like, when we get to work, you know, how many, I'll just say this, how many wake up in the morning some days and be like, I don't want to go to work today. I don't want to go to school today. I just want a day, right, to myself, right? We've all had those days, right? But motivation, that's your intrinsic, right? That's your drive that's within you. And it's whatever that, it's different for everybody, right? Your motivation is different, just like your motivation for school, right? Nursing school is hard. It's not for the weak, right? It's definitely not for the weak. And this, nursing school is unlike anything you'll ever do in your entire life. And so whatever motivates you, that's your intrinsic factors. It's, and it's also like, how is work? And I say it like that because how are your leaders? How are your managers? How are your coworkers? Is there a lot of negativity at work? Is there a lot of moaning and complaining? And, just really not, others not wanting to be there as well. And so, we all have those daily stresses, but like other things, when you go to work, how does it make you feel? Right? So nursing is hard. Nursing school is hard, but nursing is hard too, right? And so what are the things that motivate us when we are going to take care of our patients, right? It's, the feeling of, doing something good, right? You may not hear it often enough, right? But that one patient or that one client that says thank you, or that you've made a really big difference in their lives by being there for them, right? Because we're going to see patients at the worst times and the best times of their life. Other things that may motivate you to, go to work or, the growth potential. How many of you don't plan on stopping with your PN? How many of you plan on going back to get your RN, your BSN, your master's, your nurse practitioner, your doctorate? Miera, no, you keep it up there because I want to see Dr. Parker someday, Dr. Cooper, Dr. Larby, right? I want to see that someday. And so, those things too, a lot of organizations now, right? When you get out of nursing school, you pass your NCLEX, you're working, they're going to offer you areas for professional growth, right? Whether it's, what's that word? What's the word I'm looking for? Tuition reimbursement, right? In some places even offer, like Joel was saying, right? They'll work with you with your schedules in order to go back to school. So, there's the growth potential. And, the more respect, the more autonomy, the more collaboration that increases your job satisfaction if you feel like you're heard, right? If you walk into a situation and you are into a position and you're like, wow, I think we could do this a better way. And you bring that to, your chain of command and they recognize that and they're willing to help make changes, right? That helps. And, we also, have the other motivation where our management may not be supportive. We may not be making the best amount of money, right? Work conditions may not be great. And those are the reasons why people wake up and they don't want to go to work, right? Um, and working in healthcare, I have had that feeling, and I've been like, oh, I just don't want to go in today. But then I think about my patients and my residents, and I'm like, okay, let me go take care of them because that's the true reason why I'm there. Um, and so there is a combination of things that really kind of fall into that. Um, and then, human needs. And before we get into human needs, let's go ahead and take a break. And just be back at, we'll do 3:35. All right. So let's talk about human needs. Keep push sentence. All right. So we all know who Abraham Maslow is, right? And his wonderful hierarchy of human needs, right? So everybody has needs that need to be fulfilled. And of course, we are all internally motivated to engage in activities to help us meet those needs. And so, some of the things, what's the bottom of the pyramid? What is the most basic needs a human has?
Physiological.
Okay, our physiological needs. What are some examples of physiological needs?
Food, water, shelter.
Air,
Right? Food, water, shelter, oxygen, right? All those good things. What's the second level?
safety and belonging, or safety.
Safety and belonging, okay. And then what's the third?
But is it that one, the love and is it safety or is it love and belonging? Because I don't know if it was mixed up with safety and belonging or love and belonging.
Love and belonging. You're absolutely right. Um, and we're all striving for that highest level, right? Which is our self-actualization. So when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how does that relate to our working environment? So what are some of the basic needs that we need from our employer?
I want to say money, but that just feels.
But we do, right? We're
Yeah.
not volunteering our time, right? So money is one.
A
What
safe
else?
environment to work in.
Okay, that would be safety, right? So that would be the second level, right? A nice, safe environment. Okay. What are some other, basic stuff that we need from an employer?
Benefits.
Benefits. Who needs benefits, right? Healthcare, dental, life insurance, pet insurance. What else? I'm missing other things, other benefits, 401k or 401bs, or some sort of a retirement plan, right? Those are all things. Supervision. I don't know, we all like to have some sort of supervision. Um, and then policies, right? One thing that you'll learn if you've not thought about this before, one thing that you will learn when you go into healthcare, and I'm sure you've realized this by now, policies and procedures are super important, right? Some of us roll our eyes at policies like, oh man, not another policy, right? But those are the things that can either save you or hurt you, right? But policies help us, it helps to guide what we are doing every day. So, it is important for every organization to have policy and procedures, right? So people just don't go run amok. Safety in the workplace, job security. Um, just look at everything that's going on in the world right now, right? With lots of people, losing their jobs, or even think about, what happened during COVID, right? Healthcare workers, fortunately, we were all employed, right? There is always a need for healthcare workers. Um, but other people, right, not so much. A lot of people lost their jobs, that couldn't be, done remotely during COVID. And we're still having, look at the government and things like that. But job security is important. We look at, the belonging, things like that, relationships. Um, And this is something I used to say at nursing orientation. Um, and I hold this very true. Not everybody has to like each other in nursing, right? How many of us work with coworkers we don't like? I knew, Carmelio, I knew you were gonna raise your hand. Okay, right? We've all worked in places where there's been someone that we did not like to work with, right? But we have to get along, right? We have to build some sort of a working relationship, especially in nursing. Nursing, sorry, Joelle, but nursing is like, 90 something% women. And we know just generally women always don't get along, right? But it's, nursing also isn't an individual sport, right? It is a team sport. And so it takes a team in order to take care of our patients. At the same time, though, one thing that my mom told me when she was in nursing school, and it was very true for me, some of the best friends that I met were in nursing school and in my first nursing job. Just because, like I said earlier, nursing school is hard, right? And so it's almost like a trauma friendship that you develop with some of your classmates, right? And so, some of them, like up until my mom passed away, she had two of her friends that she went to nursing school with that were still very close with them. And I am still friends with a few that I even went to OPN school with. So, and then, when you get to your job, there's going to be people that you like at your job. It's not, and you're going to really be able to build those relationships and build a really good team. So those are some of the things that, when you look at those intrinsic and extrinsic intrinsic and extrinsic factors that really help you to, get up in the morning and go to do your job. What does it mean to be empowered? Who's ever heard the term think out of the box? I don't like that phrase, but right, think outside the box, right? When you have, everything that you need and all, all the supplies, all the support that you need in order to perform your job, right? Looking at, how to make it better, how to make things better. What kind of resources does the employer put back into their staff? Other than pizza parties, right? The infamous pizza parties in healthcare, right? How does the employer empower their staff to be the best? What are some of those things? Do they encourage, submitting ideas? Do they work within, those that, within the company to, even promote from within, right? Say you're a med nurse and you really want to be a charge nurse or you want to be a manager, like what are the abilities for you to do that? And so these are all things that, kind of make you want to go to work. You know, how many, what about what makes, other things that make you not want to work, not having good working conditions, not having the equipment that you need in order to do your job. How many of you have gone to clinical and they may be in, maybe not so much in the hospital, so we'll use like a long-term care facility or something along those lines. Have you gone to a clinical and you can't even find a vital signs machine? Or there's only one or two for the whole facility and you have to beg, borrow, and plead, right, in order to get them. Or the bladder scanner, the vein finder. Has anybody used the vein finder yet? And they
Yeah,
awesome?
I saw them at clinicals the other day. The first time I've ever seen one, and I have my phlebotomy license, so I've never even seen one before. Just the other day.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
You didn't see?
no, we didn't
Oh, wow.
have those in school.
They're super expensive. I will tell you that. Um, they are super expensive. So, depending on like even for schools, if they can find them like secondhand use, that kind of thing. Most units don't have them as well. Before I left Virginia, I was talking with one of the nurse managers at one of the local hospitals. Um, it used to be anytime you needed an IV stick, right? They would call the IV team, right? It wasn't even like maybe in the ED, the ICU, but like med surge, they could just call the IV team. They would come start their IVs and things like that. Um, and so they're really getting away from the use of the IV teams. So they've actually put those, there's probably another name for them, and I'm just going to use vein finder. But they're putting the vein finders on the units so that, the nurses have a little bit of assistance in order to get those IVs started. Unrealistic workload. So things, who here has worked in long-term care? Okay, so not many, but look at the workload of some of those nurses in long-term care. So the last facility I worked at for the med nurses, it was 30 patients to one nurse. So that one nurse had 30 patients or 30 residents to pass meds to. If one person called out, because not always were like we would try to staff like 30 or 2 med nurses and a charge nurse, or a desk nurse. And so the desk nurse would do like admissions and discharges, right? Pharmacy issues, families, that kind of thing. And then the med nurses just pass meds. But if, a lot of times we didn't have staffing to staff 3 nurses, so we would only have 2. If one person called out, that left that nurse with 60 patients. Right? That's a horrible nurse to patient ratio.
I would never accept that because you have a right to refuse. You cannot have two carts and 2 keys and taking care of 60 patients. That's a big liability.
It's a huge liability. And
You can never
so
do that.
yeah. And so as a nurse manager, I was on the cart more than I was a nurse manager because the administration would be like, well, just have the nurses pass them. And there's only one nurse. And I personally am not that type of person. So I would be on the other cart. And not every manager is like that. But unrealistic workloads, right? I remember one time a long time ago, back when I was a CNA, working in a 175 bed facility, and we were at 175. It was flu season, and in a 175 bed facility, we had 2 CNAs came to work that night. And so think about that. But unrealistic workloads, right? What's the expectation? That's definitely something that, would be a dissatisfier for your job. And regulatory demands like paperwork. We all know paperwork is a lot. I will say that with the advancement of electronic medical records, right, it does get to be a lot easier when you're doing charting. Back when I'm going to go back when I first was at LPN, we were still paper charting, and I worked skilled care. So every single one of my residents had to have a documented full head to toe assessment every day. And so it was a lot. It was a lot. And so those are things that would cause us to be dissatisfied for our job, right? That we would wake up in the morning and be like, don't want to go to work today. And so those are things that, as leaders, as managers, looking at the working environment, looking at the resources that have available and what do you need in order to do your job effectively. And so that would be like, going to your boss, your supervisors, your managers, your, nursing leaders and be like, here are some great, here are some ideas on how to make things better. When we look at communication skills, so this is your verbal, your nonverbal, your written communication, your telephone communication. When we're, your communication is going to be different depending on who you're speaking with, right? So when you're delegating or you're speaking with your CNAs, make sure that your directions are clear, very specific, and tell them exactly what needs to be done. Depending on where you work, let's say, if you have 3 CNAs, 4 CNAs, 2 CNAs, be very specific with what, anything outside of what their normal day-to-day duties are, be very specific. Another thing is to be a role model. And so this is something that really need to pay attention to. As an LPN, as an LVN, you are the role model for your nursing assistants. And so the best thing that we do is we, promote effective communication. So discouraging the profanity, the gossip, the rumors, the personal criticisms, try to maintain that professional environment as much as possible. Use those iMessages, right? iMessages we know are super important. When you're talking to supervisors, managers, what is that? I can't remember the adage. If you don't want to be part of the solution, or what is it? Oh my gosh, I can't remember what it is now. You can be part of the solution or part of the problem. Is that something along those lines, right? So let's say, maybe you are, frustrated, you're, upset about working conditions or the lack of equipment. One thing that's always nice to do, don't be a constant complainer, right? Be a presenter, right? Go to your RN, go to your manager, go to the DN, the DON, and with the situation, but offer a solution, right? If I hate to say it this way, but if staffing is an issue, why is staffing an issue, right? Maybe there's, some of those things that are out there, right? There's, unrealistic workload, there's not enough functioning equipment, right? But bring some solutions, right? So, maybe ordering more equipment, trying to work that into the budget. It may not be an immediate fix, right? It may not happen tomorrow, but kind of try to be part of the solution. And, if you do recognize a problem, bring those ideas to the situation. Nonverbal communication, we've talked about that too, right? Make sure that your body language and the messages you're sending is consistent, that it matches, right? That you're also remaining professional, right? If you have to reprimand somebody, you don't want to be smiling about it, right? You just want to be firm and assertive. You want to make sure that you're facing them, you're maintaining your respectful distance, your eye contact, but being very firm when you're delivering a message like that. Another job, in another way, if you're praising somebody for doing an outstanding job, right, that's when you want to be smiling and happy. So, try just to be, and then be open, right? Make sure you have that nice open posture. You're not slouching, your arms crossed, your hands in your pockets, right? You want to be very open in your nonverbal appearance. Written communication is probably amongst the hardest. When you are writing, whether you're posting a message for CNAs, when you're communicating with patients' families, with patients, with family members, with other members of the healthcare team, right? We want to make sure that we are using the appropriate language. We also always if you're writing something, always review before posting. Read them out loud. In some cases, have somebody proofread for you, right? Make sure your language, make sure your tone is appropriate. And then, when you're delegating and you're writing your assignments for your CNAs, you don't want them to make judgments at all. So be very clear and concise when you're writing what you want them to write. Even when you're documenting in your client's charts, your residents' charts, be very clear, be very concise, make sure that you are telling the whole story, you're non-biased. Written communication really is the easiest, if you ask me, right? Because you can sit there and rewrite it like 10 different times before you find, the actual message that you were trying to convey. Telephone. Who here likes to answer the telephone at work? Yeah, I am too. I would sit on the unit and that phone would ring and it'd be like, oh, I don't want to answer the phone. Always be, calm, courteous, right? Answer it appropriately. When you're calling somebody like a family member or even a coworker, right? You want to identify, you want to, and I do this when I'm calling somebody like a student or somebody else. I'll be like, hi Heather, it's Miss Martinez from Fortis. So I try to introduce myself as well as greet the person that I am calling. That also helps, and I inadvertently dial the wrong number, right? They can say, this isn't Heather. I'm like, okay. But you can always, hi, how are you doing today? And then be like, okay, so here's the reason for my call. And so, they're in whatever the reason for your call is. You can get that out of the way. And then, you can end the call. You don't have to have like long drawn out, conversations. It doesn't have to wander off of the topic of the reasons why you called. The goal is to, when people are calling us, that we should answer the phone in an appropriate amount of time. I know it's hard sometimes too, because I've been on the unit too, and I can hear the phone ringing at the desk, but I've also got a handful of medications that I can't just drop and go answer the phone. Make sure that you're clear, that you're not loud, you're just, at a moderate tone. And then when you're dealing with family members or even patients, make sure that you are using those active listening skills in order to, get what you need from your patients or your family members when you're talking to them. So how do we encourage verbal communication from nursing assistants? And so this is something that I will be honest that I've even struggled with in some situations as well. You give a task, all right, let's just say you come in the morning, right? One of the first things that the CNAs will do is get vital signs. This was always my pet peeve. And so all the vital signs would go on a piece of paper. The vital signs would get put in the vital signs book. Meanwhile, you're on a cart, you're passing meds, and you have all these people on blood pressure medications, and you need the vital signs. And now you have to go hunt them down. So, what are some things that we can do to encourage that communication with, nurses and CNAs? And this was learned behavior from previous nurses who were more of a leave me alone, let me just do my thing, I don't want to be bothered. So they just stopped communicating with the nurses about certain things. So trying to get them to open up. So think about how you want to be talked to. What are some things that would encourage communication between a LPN and a CNA? What are some things that would encourage you to talk to your nurses?
Well, if they, were courteous to us and, came off to us as being open, available, they're willing to listen, and it would be easier than, if they're always kind of shoving you to the side, you don't really want to go and talk to them in a way.
Right. So giving them your full attention, right? If the CNA comes up to you, provide them with your full attention, right? Avoid any distraction, stay focused on what they're talking about and what they're asking or what information that they are giving to you. You don't want to judge them, right? They haven't been to nursing school, right? So there's a lot of things that they don't know. And I have worked with some CNAs that are amazing and fantastic and are smart as a whip. But it is a different scope of practice, right? It's a different way of thinking, right? So understand them at their level, right? Make sure that, we're not disregarding what they're sending to us, right? And then, give them feedback, right? Positive feedback and, I don't want to say negative feedback. It's not really what I'm looking for. That's not the word I'm looking for, but if they're incorrect or they're wrong, right? We need to correct those behaviors as well, provide feedback as to why that was incorrect or, not correct. And then respect all their opinions, right? And we all, I'm sure, and I know I have had some very unrealistic opinions about how things should be done in certain situations. And so it's, just for the good of the workplace, but, even I knew they were unrealistic, but I was going to present them anyway. All opinions matter, right? Everybody needs to feel like they have the right, they have the ability to speak up, ask questions, right? Again, if you have a problem, identify a solution, right? If I come to you with a problem, I'm going to offer a solution. My solution may not be on the same page as what your solution may think, but it is an idea of, something that we can do to make things better. And so just, some kind of things and use your nursing process. You can use the nursing process for anything. It's not just for dealing with the patient, right? You can sit down and use that nursing process when we're looking at, ways to make changes or way to deal with situations that come up in the workplace. And I'm going to come back right now. I'm going to come back to stress management. So nobody had any ideas for stress management, which let's talk about this. So stress management, nursing is stressful. We covered that, right? And it's not just nursing. Any work environment has the ability to be stressful. Like for example, as wonderful I think as Chick-fil-A is, that has to be a very stressful job because they are never not busy. I don't think I've ever passed a Chick-fil-A that hasn't had a line around the corner, around the building, right? I don't think I've down here, the only grocery store is called HEB. And I was just telling my husband the other day, like, I don't think they're kind of everywhere. But I'm like, is there ever a time where there isn't a million people in the parking lot that people are like, you have to drive around the parking lot and just wait for somebody to leave because it's always full, right? Those situations can be stressful, right? And it's not nursing. Long-term care is very stressful, right? The workload, conflicts, you're dealing with healthcare providers, you're dealing with family members, you're dealing with clients, you're dealing with therapists, the residents, depending on what type of facility that you're working in, back when I was an LPN, those Medicare, Medicaid or the Medicare Medicare patients, they would stay for 90 days when they were there for therapy. Hip replacements, knee replacements, strokes, whatever. Now, the average stay is under 30 days. So think about that, right? We are rehabbing them in 30 days. And so it's a very big revolving door, right? People are coming and going, very often. And then, nobody is ever 100% happy or satisfied, right? And so, every day is a different day. And so you're not really sure what you're going to work with walk into. And so, stress, anxiety can lead to some dysfunctional behavior, decreasing performance of your CNAs. So one conversation I had, who was it? Was it Carmelia? Was it you? That said that, not accepting your assignment.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So here's the thing. Once you clock in and you get that unit, you've accepted that assignment. And so that
No,
can be,
I go look first and then I clock in.
so not every, yeah. So that
Yeah.
is another one. You can see what's going on the floor, but think about it. You've got CNAs that are going to be there every single shift. They're going to do what they have to do. And then you always have some that are going to call out once a week, right? Well, what ends up happening is those CNAs that are there every day, that are doing their job, they're going to get burnt out. They're going to get burnt out,
But
right?
I feel if you are me, I've been a CNA since 2007. So even if I did go work at a nursing home versus somebody that's don't have no patient care experience, nobody has never have been a CNA, you don't have to keep bugging your CNAs for every little thing. That's what's going to burn them out. A nurse that has never had CNA experience, never worked in long term, never been a CNA. You're too good to go past ice water. You're too good to get the remote off the floor, and you got to keep finding your CNA for everything. That's what's going to piss the CNA off.
And you're absolutely 100% correct with that. You are 100% correct at that. So when I take students to clinicals, there is no such thing to me as CNA work. And I've said this a million times. And we go to clinicals, we're just doing CNA work. It is not CNA work. It is nursing care, bed baths, toileting, like Carmelia said, picking the remote up off the floor, giving them ice water. That's not CNA work. That is nursing work. Okay. And that's one thing that I've always, when I've worked in long-term care, because that's my primary background, is, it's teamwork. You can't expect your CNAs to do it all. There's not enough time in the day. But that burnout, they will start to do the bare minimum, and that's scary. right? Other dysfunctional job, things like negative interactions, not, ineffective communication, high staff turnover, unhappy residents, families. And we know dealing with unhappy residents and unhappy families in any situation, regardless if it's long-term care in the hospital, it does add stress to your job. So, how do we deal with it? How do we create a less stressful work environment? Well, I'm going to be honest, like what Carmelia would, she said had a really good point. Help is key, right? You can't, if you have, 75 patients and you only have 4 CNAs, right? Help when you're passing your medications, check them to make sure they're clean and dry, make sure that they have water at their bedside, that they have their call bell, their remote control, right? All of that. Because a lot of times that's what they're going to call the CNA for, is because they're wet, they're soiled, they can't reach something that they need, right? That's primarily, so while you're in there giving their medications, doing their treatments, check all that, right? You can help to reduce that workload. It's not increasing your workload because you're already in there. What are, we talked about resiliency before too, right? Not everybody is resilient, right? Not everybody handles stress positively. So, think of things that you can do. Exercise, music, make sure, I am going to say this, make sure you're eating and you're drinking. Okay. When you go to work, it's not 12 straight hours of, you need to make sure that you're taking your breaks, that you're taking your lunch, that you're staying hydrated, that you're using the bathroom when you need to use the bathroom. Make sure that you're getting enough rest, right? These are things that we encourage with our CNAs as well. And what are some things that you like to do outside of work, right? Those are all things that help you to de-stress. Like I like to build Legos. I like to read. I like to camp. I like to spend time with my grandkids. I like to take my dogs for a walk, right? What are some things that you can do to help you de-stress from the day that are positive, right? And we're trying to avoid those negative stress management tools, right? We don't want drinking and all the other things that could possibly happen. But as an LPN, as a charge nurse, right, you have the ability to help, create a less stressful work environment, promoting that communication, right? Making sure that you're a good resource person to go to, that you are providing for a calm environment, and that we treat everybody with respect. Please, thank you. We're not demanding they do something right away unless it's an absolute emergency. Like I would never try to redirect a CNA away from their what they need to do unless it was a true emergency. Like I remember one time I heard someone yelling and I walked into the room and they were halfway on the floor, and I was going to make sure they did not hit that floor, but at the same time, I'm yelling out the hallway for somebody to come help me because it was a bigger person and I could not lift them up and get them back into that chair. So if I need to, I will redirect in an emergency situation, but be respectful that they have responsibilities as well. And so we can try to identify ways to make it a little bit easier. The ABCD ways of increasing awareness of irrational thinking. So A is activating event. B is belief about the situation, C is the consequences, and then D is disrupt irrational thoughts. So, you're working the unit, and, you have, I'm just going to use the book example. You have a CNA that called in sick. And so, the belief or the self-talk about the situation, it says that the LPN LVN manager was the charge nurse thinks the nursing assistant must have been out partying. Okay, that's, what's in the back of their mind. C is the consequences. The LPN LVN manager was abrupt with the nursing assistant on the telephone. She allowed herself to feel angry about the absence, and she allowed it to ruin her whole day. And then the nursing assistants avoided her like the plague. Disrupt irrational thoughts. Choose a more rational, assertive response to the situation, focusing on the objective facts. Avoid your subjective statements, right? Like she was out partying. And that helps you to avoid anger over this incident and its effect on nursing assistants. So you're going to get to know the people that you work with. There's no doubt, right? And there may be things that you would know, that happens. But we want to make sure that we are avoiding that irrational thinking, making those judgments. If somebody calls you and says, hey, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it into work today. I'm sick. I have a headache. Really, the best thing that you can do is say, okay, thank you. I hope you feel better. See you on your next shift, whatever it is. That helps to avoid you getting upset, even if you know that there was, something else that was leading to the call out. So just be very objective. Avoid, don't add anything to the story. A lot of times we know that it's going to add, stress to the others that are there. And so, and everybody talks to each other. So just always handle it in the most respectful way that you can. How to create a less stressful environment. Organize your shift. And so as new nurses, right, this is going to take time to kind of understand, right, wherever it is that you're going to go to work. Organizing your shift is, as you start working there, through orientation, working with other nurses, your nurse managers, your DONs, that kind of thing, you're going to understand how the units run, how things are done. But find what works best for you and keep it organized. Go if you have it, you'll know exactly what you need to get done for each shift. And so you're going to develop a pattern of work that is going to work best for you. Like, for example, I would come in the morning, if I knew I was going to be on a cart. I would come in the morning, I would count the cart with the nurse, and then I would do my blood sugars first thing. So, I mean, I had me running up and down the hallway, but I got all my blood sugars. I was able to do my initial rounds, right? Then I could give my insulins, and then I would start my med pass, right? So everybody is going to have a different system. It's going to be what works best for you. Make sure that there's adequate resources for the nursing assistants to get their jobs done. So you've been in long-term care facilities. Some of you have worked in long-term care. What are some of the resources that we never seem to have enough of in long-term care? Anybody want to hazard a guess? What are some things we never have enough of in long-term care?
Staff.
Staff. Linen. Linen. Oh my gosh. I can't tell you, even bringing students to clinical and long-term care, I'd be like, oh, there's no linen and we'd have to wait. You wouldn't even have a towel or a washcloth in order to do AM care before breakfast, right? So identifying ways that, we can make sure that there is enough linen, briefs, wipes, um, making sure that those are available, that you have, the soaps and all that other stuff, to help those CNAs do their jobs. Encourage the nursing assistants to take breaks as well. We used to do a break schedule on each unit. All right. So this way, everybody was able to get their break, and not all of them left the unit at the same time. Right. So, we made sure that there was a rotation of breaks, that everybody was able to take their breaks. And, didn't have to worry about that. Everybody got to eat, use the bathroom, do whatever it is that they wanted to do on their break. And that we still had CNAs on the unit to help with patient care, while they were on their break. Create a calm environment. Can't tell you how important this is, especially when it seems like the unit is on fire, right? Being calm, being cool, collected, while still getting things done, and treat your CNAs with respect. I know everybody has seen, the TikTok videos about how some of the new residents talk to the nurses, right? And, it's the same thing with our CNAs. CNAs are some of the hardest working people that you will ever meet, and they are severely underpaid for the amount of work that they do and the work that they do, the care that they provide. And so they are members of the healthcare team, and they are very important. And so treating them with respect is going to get you a lot further than if you disrespect, or you're disrespectful to them. They are going to be there in some of those situations where you really need them, if you treat them with the respect that they deserve. And again, with those problem solving, you can use this much like your nursing process, right? Collect your data, right? Your assessment. You can define the problem, set goals, select interventions, evaluate the plan. Just like you would use the nursing process, you can do this and, help to, eradicate some of those problems that we may see in nursing. All right, so some of the skills that we need for leadership: documentation. I know you've probably heard this from day one. If it wasn't documented, it was not done, and that is absolutely true. Specific, objective documentation, that is imperative, not just, because we need to be able to present our patients and make sure that we have, met all their needs. It's also legally important. Again, if you hadn't documented, it wasn't done. And so anything that you put into a patient's chart is legal documentation. It can be summoned into court. It is there for everybody to review. And so make sure what you write is completely objective, that we don't put any subjective information. You don't want to do any personal judgments. You don't want to write anything negative about your patient in there. If they refuse care, that's one thing. But Mr. Jones was extremely stubborn today and he just wouldn't do anything I asked him to do. We don't want to write that, right? Be very objective. Federal regulations. And so when we look at federal regulations, this is the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. And so OBRA contains the Nursing Home Reform Act. And so when we document, it's super important because this not only does it help us to meet federal regulations, but it's also how we get paid. And so if we have a resident in there and it doesn't look like that, all we're doing is providing him a couple medications for the day, and we're not documenting their ADLs and their personal care and their therapies and their wound care and their oxygen or whatever else is going on with them, then CMS and health and the other health insurance are going to be like, why are we paying you to take care of him? He could be doing this at home, right? Or why are, this reimbursement's going to be minimal, right, compared to what it should be. It also helps with that omnibus budget reconciliation act to show that we are providing them quality care, right? And so big push, there's a big difference between quality and quantity of care. Okay, you can do, oxygen, trach therapy, you can have a peg tube and catheters and PICC lines and all of that stuff, and you can provide a huge quantity of care. But if the quality of care is decreased, that is going to significantly impact your reimbursement as well. Patient satisfaction is the forefront. And that's why we talk so much about really good communication and having that, when you walk into a residence room, you're going to smile, right? And you're going to be, I'm not saying overly crazily happy, right? But you're going to be nice. You're going to be respectful when you're providing that care. And so this too, make sure that you're practicing within your Nurse Practice Act as well. Organizational skills, time management. Time management is key. That is probably one of the biggest things that's going to be your your best friend or your worst nightmare, right? When you are out working, much like it is in nursing school. Who are my procrastinators? Am I the only one? Okay, thanks, Jasmine. Thanks for not making me feel all alone. So, time management is key, and even the best laid plans, right? We just know, right? You think you're having, and we're not on a unit, but you think you're having a nice quiet day and everything's going your way, right? And boom, right? Everything just seems to fall apart. And so time management is helpful. Like I said, you're going to learn as you are in practice, how how you want to set up your day, and try to, do the best you can to stay within that schedule. But it's, kind of just making sure that you can get everything done. Who's heard of CQI or continuous quality improvement? No, really? So CQI or continuous quality improvement, this is something that it was originally in more of like your like your business, like not healthcare. But continuous quality quality improvement, is something that everybody works on because, like I said, we've had a shift from quantity of care to quality of care. And quality is determined by our client outcomes. And so the client outcomes are objective, measurable results of nursing activities, right? So you have that skilled care resident that came in for stroke therapy, right? How long were they there? What were the services like when they were provided? All of that. And so everybody in the facility is going to be part of that CQI program. And so like we would meet monthly. We would bring ideas to the table to try to make things better. But when working with CNAs, you know, it's reviewing their job description, you know, what role they have in providing that quality and that safe care. It is continuous. Like I said, most people are going to be, you know, be invited to sit on the CQI committee, um, reporting the safety issues like a malfunctioning Hoyer lift, you know, broken benches, um, broken beds, you know, um, trying to think, what is it like, stained overhead tiles, cracks in the floors, those things. Those are, you know, potentially safety hazards for your residents. So how do they, you know, what are some things that they would see, the CNAs would suggest? Um, and like I said, there is a committee and we'll document it. And then we look back and we try to say, okay, what can we do? What can we do? Or here, we're going to try these interventions to see if this help. And then at the next meeting, we're going to evaluate those interventions. And if they didn't help, let's see if we can come up with new ones, much like the nursing process. And then conflict resolution. Conflicts occur when two or more persons interact, right? So you can have conflicts arise with nursing assistants, with staff, with residents, with families, with healthcare providers. And so how do we deal with conflict? It's just a matter of settling their differences. A lot of times as the nurse, you're going to be the, you know, the mediator within the conflict, right? So what are some things that we can do? Like, you know, I've had conflicts where the resident doesn't like the CNA that's taking care of her, or I've had conflicts where the CNA absolutely refuses to work with the, you know, a particular resident, for a variety of reasons. What are some ways that we can make this better, right? In certain situations, you may have to remove the CNA from that patient's care, give them, you know, a different assignment so that there isn't a conflict between the CNA and the resident. You may have, you know, CNAs that don't work well together. In those cases, I have put them on opposite ends of the unit, right? You're going to work on this end, you're going to work on this end, and just stay out of the middle. But what are some things that we can do, right? That's a temporary situation to get us through a shift, but what are some things that we can do to make it better? And that's where your negotiation skills and your, you know, critical thinking, your problem solving abilities are going to come into play. A lot of times you're going to have to sit people down together and be like, okay, let's talk about the situation. What are some things that we can do to make this better? And with that, let's go ahead and take a break. Be back at 4:45. Mm. All right, so as we finish up this chapter, so other things, human relationship skills, the ability to get along and relate to others, which includes anger management, um, how well can we control our emotions in certain situations? Um, we also may be doing performance evaluations on our nursing assistants, and looking to empower team members, encouraging personal growth, increasing their self-confidence, and being non-judgmental. Remember when we're dealing, especially with anger management, coping skills are key, right? So having those effective coping skills. But, when you're looking at, preventing anger in our nursing assistants, right? Remember in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, make sure that we're meeting the needs, right? The belonging, the recognition, using assertive communication, not aggressive communication, assertive communication with those I messages, using your active listening skills. Team building exercises. I know that sounds crazy, and a lot of times you're like, how do we even fit that into a busy day or a busy schedule? But team building exercises can be really important, especially, if you have a team where not everybody's really working together, not getting along. And then when you're looking at doing their performance evaluation, you want them to participate in that. You want them to provide an objective evaluation of their own in performance, right? That helps them, to identify areas that they're really good, or maybe that some areas that they are really weak in. But, anytime I've had to have a conversation with somebody that has not been performing well, whether it was a coworker, a subordinate, a student, right? I always want to say what you're doing well first, right? What are the good qualities? What are the things that they're doing well? And then, talk about what they're doing well, and then get to the things that they can improve upon, right? It's not like you're building them up and they're then bringing them down, right? You want to highlight what they're doing well. And then you can go back and be like, okay, but here are some things that we need to work on, moving forward. Does that make sense? And then when we look at assignment versus delegation, and so this is again some of the things that you're going to need to do as part of your job as an LPN. Assignment is the distribution of work that each staff member is responsible for during a given work period. Make sure that the activities are within their job description, their job position, their scope of practice, and their educational background, right? So you're going to have a CNA go in and do an assessment on your patient, right? Anytime you assign a task to a CNA, you are still overall responsible for the care that is provided. So, whatever it is that you ask the CNA to do, then you need to go back and you need to follow up to make sure that it was completed and that it was completed correctly and appropriately. Delegation is a transfer of responsibility for the performance of an activity from one to another, while accountability for the outcome is still retained by the delegator. And it's just, a collaborative process to make sure that everything, gets done to the extent that it is supposed to get done. It shows, increase in our, client outcomes, increase in patient satisfaction. And so again, this is where your Nurse Practice Act is going to come into play. Make sure that you know what your scope of practice is in the state that you're practicing in, as well as the scope of practice of the person that you're delegating to, whether it's a CNA, an unlicensed assistant personnel, whatever. Make sure that it is within their scope of practice that you are delegating appropriately. So again, your Nurse Practice Act, that's going to provide your guidance as to what tests can be delegated. It's not required. The State Board of Nursing also may provide some guidance with that. Again, you need to understand the scope of practice for the UAP or the CNA that you are delegating to. Other resources, rules, regulations, guidelines, memorandums. NAPNIs is another one. The nursing practice standards, the policy and rules on delegation of the employer. So your employer may have specific things that cannot be delegated that, so you have to make sure that you're looking at all of these before you delegate or assign to an unlicensed personnel. So here are the 5 rights of delegation. Has anybody seen those before? Yes. Okay, I was going to say, I'm hoping so. So the 5 rights of delegation is, the right task, making sure, excuse me, the delegated task must conform to established guidelines. Again, so making sure that you're assigning the task to the right person. The right task, that it's not within, that it's within their scope. The right circumstances, the delegated tasks do not require independent nursing judgment, right? So you're not going to go send a CNA in to do an assessment on your patient. The right person, make sure they're qualified, they're competent in order to perform the task. The right direction and communication. So again, communication is key, right? Making sure that you provide clear explanation about what you want them to do. And then, they need to come back and they need to report that back to the nurse. And then the right supervision and evaluation. So they come back to you with information that you requested, and then you're going to provide feedback to either assess or improve this, the process, and evaluate any of those client outcomes that are there. So this is, I'm not going to describe this to you, but here is a nice little delegation process schematic. And so why do we delegate? So why do you think delegation is important?
Efficiency, so like time.
Efficiency, right? Absolutely, right? Efficiency is key. What else? We talked about some of those differences between managing and leading. What else does that do?
Kind of teaches, like it gives the assistant, like the UAP, an opportunity to maybe do a skill that they haven't done before that they're able to do.
Okay. Okay. It's empowering, right? It's empowering to them. And so we don't want to give them a skill that they haven't done before, right? Even though if they're allowed. So, and that's another thing that you have to be aware of too. And that was a really good point that you brought up. Just like LPNs, just like RNs, CNAs have a scope of practice, right, that they fall within. And then that scope of practice can be lessened depending on where they work. And so I've worked in some long-term care facilities where CNAs do the vital signs. I've also worked in long-term care facilities where CNAs do not do vital signs. In some areas, in some states, CNAs can do tube feedings. Okay, so again, that's where your scope of practice is. If it is a skill that they have been taught, but they have never done before, you always want to make sure that you are with them the first time they do it, so you can evaluate the process, make sure that they're doing it appropriately. But it is empowering for them, right? It's empowering for them. It allows for personal growth. It makes them feel important as well. So yeah, so improve their job skills, their knowledge, their abilities, right? Helps them to feel like part of the team as well. And so before you delegate, you need to assess your client, because we are not going to delegate to an unstable client. So we want to look at the stability of our client before we delegate. Again, make sure that you're only delegating duties that they have, the training, the education for, that they have demonstrated competence to. Delegation cannot be transferred. Okay, so if CNA A I assign to do it, CNA A cannot give it to CNA B, right? It can't be transferred. They do have the right to be like, hey, no, I don't want to do that. This is where that communication is key. Why do they not want to do that task? Maybe they are not comfortable with their skills. Maybe they don't have the time. Maybe something happened and they fell behind and they're already overtasked. But ask for the reason, right? Because for proper delegation, the function has to be voluntarily accepted. And then use your nursing process. You also, we're going to be monitoring the activities of our nursing assistants, making sure, that we're doing spot checks, that things are being done appropriately. If by any chance we delegated incorrectly, and a resident was harmed, then we are the ones that are liable for that because we delegated that. So again, be very careful, and making sure that you're delegating the tasks appropriately. So some of the things that we can delegate to our nursing assistants, personal care, right? Your hygiene, your dressing, your toileting, grooming, skincare, feeding, hydration, basic restorative skills, you're transferring positioning, ambulation, maintaining range of motion, measure, record vital signs, height, weight, INOs, assisting with elimination, including catheter care. So, emptying the catheters, making sure that cath care is performed to try to prevent urinary tract infections. And then, of course, the safety, right? Fall prevention, infection prevention. In some cases, application of heat and cold. They can also help with some specimen collection, urine and stool, but also be very specific, right? Make sure that they know how to collect the urine, as well as the stool, what kind of container it's supposed to go into. Things that we cannot delegate, complex sterile procedures, right? No sterile procedures. So no wound cares, no putting Foley catheters in, no trach suctioning, right? Crisis situations. You can't delegate a crisis situation. Most cases, and this is something different too, in some facilities that I have worked in, CNAs had to have their CPR certification. In some facilities that I worked in, the CNAs were not required to have a CPR certification, right? So you have to know that about your CNAs as well. most of the time if something goes down, they're going to come get you, right? If there's a true serious situation, they are going to come get you. Remember that initial client education is done by the registered nurse, right? And then the LPNs can reinforce client teaching, but we cannot delegate that to an unlicensed assistant personnel. They can collect the data, but they cannot interpret the data, right? So they, get the vital signs, they get the glucose levels, whatever it is. They can't interpret that. They bring that to you as the nurse. You need to interpret it and then make the clinical decision from there. Does it need to be rechecked? You might want to go in and assess the client, see what's going on with the client. Again, make sure it's within their scope of practice, that they are allowed to do it, and that you are always going back and you are following up to make sure that it is done and it is done correctly. Because like I said, if anything is not done correctly, or if you assign something that is outside of their scope of practice and the patient gets hurt, then we are the ones that are going to be ultimately responsible. So what are some things that can increase the LPN's employment opportunities? So these are things that, think about as an LPN, even as you think of like what you want to do as an RN, right? So what are some things that, can help you to do better or to, increase your opportunities? Certifications. Certifications are always good to have. IV certifications, long-term care certification, wound care. Anybody like wounds? I love wounds. Wounds are awesome. I don't like the fact that people get them. There's a difference. I don't like the fact that people get wounds, but I love wounds. Wounds are amazing. The bigger, the better, right? But there are certifications that you can get as an LPN. Most of them you would, you have to look what the requirements are. Usually there's like a time in practice, right? So you have to be, work in that area for a certain amount of time in order to qualify for certification or the certification exams. Again, most of them are going to have an exam that you will have to take in order to get that certification. Seminars are really good. Leadership courses. There's like I forget what it's called. I am a member of it and I forget what it's called, but it's like a leadership academy that you can go through. In-service programs. Most organizations have continuing education that is required through whatever organization it is. And depending on where you are working, they also may have additional education that is provided. So you'll have like a standard set of, yearly requirements, right? Like your bloodborne pathogens, your OSHA, your HIPAA, that kind of thing. And then sometimes they will offer additional courses that'll be available through a learning management system type thing. Read books and articles. So how many of you plan to ever use your nursing textbooks again after you graduate? Yes, I love that answer, Miera. Yes. You would be amazed still how many times that, I've gone back to my textbooks to look up information. Yes, I'm old school too, because, we didn't have the handy dandy internet when I first became a nurse. And so when patients would ask about disease processes that you weren't 100% sure, I would go to my med-surg book. That was my go-to. Everything is online now, right? So it's in some cases, it's even just a simple Google search, as long as you're making sure that you're using reliable websites. Articles, look at your nursing journals, that the more, you're just you're empowering yourself with information, right? Bringing those ideas to, leadership about ways to make things better, improving practices, and then look, depending on where you're working, what are some of the opportunities that are available to you? And networking is key. And so there's a lot of nurses out there, but you would be surprised at how small the nursing community seems sometimes, right? You're like, I've gone into places and I've seen people and I'm like, oh my gosh, I used to work with that person, or they were a student of mine or something, right? It's very, very small world. And so, empower yourself the more you know, right? Feel like a commercial. But that's really what it is empowering yourself. What do you want to do? Set your goals. And then, kind of take it from there. And then the last little bit we didn't really talk about yet was, goes back to communication and doing that change of shift reporting. So I'm going to be honest, I like bedside report. So, a walking report with oncoming and offgoing. In some cases, it's not always feasible for either time constraints or, whatever reason. But when you're looking at that, giving that, end of shift report, you're going to do just a quick overview of each one of your patients, each one of your residents. And you want to kind of highlight, there any changes in conditions that may have occurred, any, current ongoing problems, any new orders that may have come in, any suspected side effects to treatments. And so that's where your SBAR really comes into play, right? Situation, background assessment, recommendation. And then you're going to pass that off. And what have you done? I guess that's one of the big things, right? So if there is, any kind of a change in condition, what have you done, right? Was it severe enough that you had to call a provider, or is it something that we were able to handle and, you're handling on site? So you provide that insight as to what's going on with that. You want to avoid any of the, meaningless things, that isn't going to make a difference. Routine nursing care, we know is routine nursing care, so we really don't need to focus on that. And then any value or personal opinions around, regarding your patients, try to avoid that. Hospital report's going to be a little bit different. It's probably not going to be as long as a long-term care report, right? So you're reporting on 30 patients, it's going to be a little bit longer than if you're reporting on 4 to 6 or 8 patients, depending on where you are at. But we want to make sure that we are providing that oncoming staff with the adequate, appropriate and adequate information in order for them to get their shift started. And there was something else I wanted to say, and it just went blank. I like walking. I prefer walking. And the reason why, is because unfortunately, I have come on to a shift and, did not do a walking round. And when I went after receiving report and went to do, start my rounds, a resident had passed in between. And so I very quickly learned that I started to do walking rounds. The resident was expected, it was expected that they were going to pass. They were in hospice care. However, it's still one of those things. So, however you do your rounds, it just makes it a little bit better. to do those walking rounds. And a lot of nurses prefer to do it that way. It helps you to lay eyes on the patients. You can see what their status is. And then you can, go from there. All right, so we have a few more minutes. What questions do you have for me? Did everybody have a long weekend? Lots of clinicals this weekend or something? Y'all are really quiet. I know you guys got a lot going on this week, this term. All right, so let's see. So next week is the midway mark. We hit week 6, almost halfway there. I know you guys still have there's still a lot that needs to be done, especially with your other classes. So next week, your professional development paper is due. And we will have unit exam 2 next week. So after the exam, we will have class. What else? I was gonna say, let's do this week. Since y'all aren't talking, I'm gonna talk. So week 5, we have your Saunders questions. Everybody good with the Saunders questions? Remember, it's only 25 questions. You have complete control over your Saunders questions, right? So try to maximize those points with your Saunders questions. Again, your personal development is due in week 6. What else? Week 7 is quiz 4. You have a discussion. Then week 8, you have some more Saunders questions in your NCSBN position paper. Week 9 is quiz 5, week 10 is exam 3, and then of course week 11 is HESI week. And then week 12, we will meet for attendance purposes. Everybody has the exam review schedule. Okay, is everybody going to attend at least one live review? Okay, just, they are helpful for those that attend. So I think when's mine? Mine is Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Of course, y'all are more than welcome to join. I don't have the other schedule in front of me. I know it's posted in your assignments so that you do have that. I would just recommend, like I said, try to attend at least one. The recordings are great, not saying that they're not. The nice thing about the live sessions is that if you do have questions, right, you are able to interact with whatever professor or instructor is giving, that exam review. Have you all been working on your study guide? Yeah. Any questions about your study guide? No? Any questions about any of the assignments? It's like pulling teeth.
I have a question about the Nurse Practice Act. I mean, if that's okay, we change the subject here.
Yeah.
Because on the quiz, I might have gotten, because I thought the CNAs were included in that Nurse Practice Act because they have a scope practice, that it's not just for LPNs and RNs, or is it?
So the
Yeah,
nurse
go ahead.
practice act is just nurse.
Yeah, it just hit me like when I just said that. So, but the CNA's scope of practice is in there, right? So the nurses can know.
I don't think so. There's a separate,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Separate. Okay, thank
there's
you.
a separate. Now, some states may have it included,
Yeah,
but for
because
the most,
I came from Washington State and I think it's in there. Like,
yeah, so
yeah.
it might have a description because it is something that is governed usually by the Board of Nursing, right? But yeah, so it just depends on the board as to whether they include the CNAs in the Nurse Practice Act or if it's going to be a separate document.
Thank you.
Yep,
I had a question about the select all.
on the quiz.
Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to find it. Okay.
What were they? Are we allowed to know?